Probably the last thing you want above you in an electrical storm is a 29-metre carbon mast. But it's been a rough 24 hours for Thomas Ruyant in the Vendée Globe on Vulnerable. It's Friday the 3rd of January in the Vendée Globe, the skipper's 54th day at sea. And as we just saw there, it's been a rough night for Thomas Ruyant, but things were even worse yesterday, and we'll see that in the next clip. We then hear from Nico Lunven and Sam Goodchild, who are both sailing upwind as there's a depression in the South Atlantic, which is making their progress north quite tricky. Then we take a look at the tracker to see how the leaders are going to get out of these light winds and finally hook into the trades which will power them towards the equator. We look at the leaderboard and how that progress, especially by the leaders, has really been slowed down over the last few days. And then at PredictWind, which shows hopefully how those winds are going to come in for Dalin, and he can then make his way into the North Atlantic. And then we also hear from Jingkun Xu, who managed to celebrate New Year's Eve twice. On Thursday afternoon, off the coast of Uruguay, Thomas Ruyant was caught in an extremely violent squall, where the winds were around 55 to 60 knots, which knocked his Amoca Vulnerable flat. The boat righted itself, but his J2 headsail was completely destroyed in the storm. The J2 is in the hold. It's destroyed. It's completely torn off along the luff sleeve. There are still a few metres squared in tatters just under the headboard, a little furled up there. I've never had anything like it. There were about 20 knots, then the wind got up all of a sudden. I didn't see it coming. It went into tornado mode. It lasted 2 hours with 45 to 60 knots.
Wonderful lights. We are on January the 7th. We are heading north in the South Atlantic to deal with a small low pressure center, quite small but very strong. So the next 24 hours are going to be quite intense here on board of BRB. We have some friends not far away. We have Biotherm just ahead of us. And then just behind we have Charal, Vulnerable, Malaysia and Teamwork. So it's going to be a big fight for the next days and maybe weeks.
The boat is okay. I mean, it's not the most comfortable conditions. There's a bit of slamming and waves. It's not too bad, but it's not very comfortable, and the wind is less and less stable as we go along. Actually, to begin with, it was fairly stable, and now it's getting less and less stable, which takes quite a bit of management between the squall clouds, trying to keep the boat going in the right direction between tacking and sail trim. It's quite tiring. The boat is definitely starting to feel a little bit tired. There's kind of creaks and crones coming from a few places and a few things to keep on top of, but on a whole, we're still in good shape. So you can't complain, and life on board is it's not that easy. There's the physical side of it is just with the slamming, it's quite difficult to find somewhere comfortable on board, and then with the strategy calls, it's not a very easy strategy situation at the moment with a low that's evolving around us, and basically no clear preferred option really between going east and having quite strong winds, going west and having no winds and probably some storm clouds, and then trying to go through the middle of this low that's building. There's none of those options appeal to me that much, but they're the only ones that exist, so we need to try and find the best one. So a South Atlantic that's proving not to be simple, but it's kind of as it is quite regularly, I think, down here. It's with the cold water coming from the south, the warm water coming from the north, and the Andes not too far away. It's it's an area where the weather is dynamic, we'll say. To gains and losses, we've seen in your group our boat speed or shifts. Paul has done well wide. There's a little bit of both, I think. Paul, I mean, there's not a lot to say. He did a good job. He committed early to a strategy and went all the way into it, and it paid off for him, so good on him. I was hesitant on that because I thought there would be a bit more impact by storm clouds in the front, but he played it perfectly, so not a lot to say. There's maybe a little bit of boat speed. I think Holcim and Charal are two very quick boats upwind, so trying to keep up with them is not easy, but I'm hanging in there.
We can see the leaders here, both Charlie Dalin and also Yoann Richomme, are still stuck in those lightish winds, and they can see just ahead of them to the north those trade winds along the Brazilian coast. It has got to be massively frustrating for them knowing that all of these days where they're not making high average speeds, that the record is just getting more difficult to set a really fast time. And we can see also Seb Simon in third place, who's having to tack away from that coast just because the wind, as it funnels down and comes down in that northerly direction, he's having to go upwind into it, so he's having to tack out into these more favourable breezes. For the group between 4th and 10th place, we can first of all see Thomas Ruyant, and it is very clear on his track the point that he was hit by that storm that we saw earlier. They're having to navigate this deep depression in the South Atlantic, and we heard from both Nico Lunven and also from Sam Goodchild just earlier as to how they're having to navigate this. You can see they're in upwind conditions at the moment, which make it very difficult slamming conditions. Currently sailing in downwind conditions and passing the latitude of the Falkland Islands are Benjamin Dutroux and Clarice Kramer in 11th and 12th respectively, with Sam Davies just a little bit further back. Her dive down to the south as she rounded Cape Horn really didn't work so well for her. And then next to round Cape Horn will be Roman Atanasio and also Damien Seguin, and then Jean Le Cam, the leading daggerboard boat, in 16th. Next up are the group who have passed Point Nemo and are on their way to Cape Horn, led by Alain Rura in 17th place. And in amongst this group are also Kujiro Shiraishi in 24th, Violet d'Orange in 25th, and Conrad Coleman 26th. In between Point Nemo and New Zealand, we have the group which includes Oliver Here and also Antoine Cornick and Jingkun Xu, who we will hear from shortly, who managed to celebrate New Year's Eve twice as he crossed the international date line. The ranking at 0600 hours UTC shows us just how slow it's been for the leaders. Charlie Dalin making 6.79 knots in 24 hours, Yoann Richomme 5.25 knots, and Seb Simon 7.76 knots. We can also see a bit further down that Paul Milhat has managed to close the gap with Thomas Ruyant after the troubles that he's had on board Vulnerable. And also then if we look down, that group between 6th and 10th place, making between 12 and 9.5 knots for Justine Metro. So that's spread out a little bit further than it had when it was so tightly bunched before. The PredictWind routing option for Charlie Dalin in the lead, compiled by sailworld.com's New Zealand editor Richard Gladwell, show that he should be getting into the trade winds soon, and then has a relatively untroubled crossing of the equator. As he makes his way up the North Atlantic, you can see the deep depression coming in from the west, and all of the routing options are now showing him going to the east of the Azores exclusion zone. After this point, I'm pretty sceptical about the weather forecast on this. It is a long way in the future. We're taking a look at the 15th and 16th of January as to getting into Les Sables d'Olonne, so we're going to have to see how that develops.
我穿越了，朋友们！就在现在这个时刻，我从今天穿越回了昨天。好了，现在马上我们要穿越180度经线。好，现在已经穿越了，从东12区穿越回西12区，跨越了180度经线，跨越了国际日期变更线，从1月2号又回到了1月1号了。我从2025年1月2号世界时的早上4点10分，穿越回了2025年1月1号当地时间的下午4点10分，从今天穿越回了昨天，然后这意味着我今年2025年过了2次元旦。 然后也意味着2025年从一开始我就多赚了1天的时间。所以这一次在旺代的时候，我们又实现了一个很值得纪念的时刻，就是正好在元旦新年的第1天，我从今天穿越回昨天，跨了2次元旦，过了2次元旦。所以我要再次说，新年快乐，过年好！我是比大家早跨的新年，然后我又多过了1次元旦，祝大家新年快乐！这就是一个有意思的事情，分享给大家，祝大家有个美好的1天，生活愉快，梦想成真。
Thank you for watching today. The format over the next couple of days will be slightly different on these updates as I'm going to be away. Do subscribe to our channel using the button down here and take a look at sailworld.com and yachtsandyachting.com for all the latest news in the world of sailing.